A racist wealthy businessman, who never knew he was close to his death, refused to let a black doctor, Dr. Maya Jackson, treat him. What happened next stunned everyone at Riverside General Hospital, forever changing how they viewed both the doctor and the patient. Mr. Paul Harris was rushed into the emergency room. The paramedics worked quickly, but time was running out. Mr. Harris's heart had suffered severe damage, and the situation was critical. Dr. Jackson, one of the very few black female doctors in a field dominated by white men, had faced challenges her entire career. From microaggressions during medical school to subtle prejudices throughout her training, she was all too familiar with how hard it could be to gain the respect of her colleagues. But today was going to be different. This was her moment to prove she was just as capable as anyone else. But what she didn't expect was Mr. Harris, a wealthy businessman, to become her first big test. After he was rushed into the ER suffering a severe heart attack, the paramedics did everything they could to stabilize him on the way in, but his condition was deteriorating rapidly. The situation was dire. When Mr. Harris was wheeled into the room, it was clear that every second mattered. His blood pressure was dangerously low, and his heart was struggling to stay in rhythm. But what should have been an urgent medical situation quickly became complicated by one thing: his refusal to be treated by Dr. Jackson. As the team prepared to take action, Mr. Harris's wife, Margaret, stood firm by his side. She noticed Dr. Jackson moving towards the patient, ready to take control of the situation. Her voice rang out sharply across the room. "No," Margaret said, her tone filled with disdain. "I don't want my husband treated by her." Dr. Jackson froze. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered prejudice, but there was something about this moment that felt heavier than the others. Mr. Harris, still weak and disoriented, tried to push himself up in the bed, his face contorting in pain as he managed to speak. "Get me someone else," he said, his voice hoarse. "I refuse to be treated by a black woman. I need a real doctor. A white doctor." Dr. Jackson felt the sting of his words, but she didn't flinch. Her job wasn't to argue, it was to save him. The hospital had a policy against discrimination, and the staff had to follow the best medical protocols, regardless of personal prejudices. But Mr. Harris was insisting on his choice, even though his life was slipping away. As the tension in the room thickened, Dr. Jackson exchanged a look with Dr. Miller, the head of cardiology. He was watching the scene unfold, but there was a sense of helplessness in his eyes. He knew Dr. Jackson was the most qualified in the room. She was the only one who could take control of the situation. "Dr. Jackson," Dr. Miller finally spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. "You're the only one who can handle this right now. We can't afford to wait for another doctor." Dr. Jackson knew what she had to do, but it was hard to ignore the bitterness in the air. She was being asked to step in not only because of her abilities, but also because no one else was available. She squared her shoulders and walked toward Mr. Harris, who was still glaring at her, as if her presence alone was an insult. But she didn't let that sway her. This wasn't about her personal feelings. It was about his life. "Mr. Harris," Dr. Jackson began calmly, her voice steady, "I understand your concerns, but I'm the only doctor who can help you right now. If you don't let me treat you, your condition will worsen. I'm here to save your life, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you survive." But Mr. Harris wasn't listening. His refusal was unwavering. "No, you're not qualified," he muttered. "I won't let you touch me." Dr. Jackson stood still for a moment, letting his words settle in. Then she took a breath and began to prepare for the procedure. She knew there wasn't a second to waste. The clock was ticking. Despite his obvious condition, Mr. Harris insists on being treated by a white doctor, convinced that a black woman can't possibly be qualified to handle his life-threatening situation. As Dr. Jackson began the procedure to stabilize him, she could feel the weight of his words lingering in the room. His dismissiveness was not just an insult to her, but to her entire career. The situation was deteriorating fast. Mr. Harris's blood pressure continued to plummet, and his breathing grew more shallow by the minute. The emergency team scrambled to manage his condition, but his refusal to allow Dr. Jackson to treat him was still hanging in the air. Despite the urgency of the moment, his personal prejudices seemed to overpower his sense of survival. "I need a real doctor," he muttered weakly, his words sharp, though faint. "Not some woman who thinks she can save me just because of her medical degree." Dr. Jackson's face remained calm. She had heard words like this before, and in the heat of battle, she couldn't afford to be distracted. But inside, a quiet fire burned. This wasn't just about the procedure. It was about breaking down the walls of prejudice that people like Mr. Harris had built their entire lives around. And right now, his life depended on her ability to do just that. Dr. Jackson stood firm, focusing entirely on the task at hand. She knew what she had to do, and her skill, her knowledge, and her years of training were more than enough to handle the situation. The minutes ticked by, and Mr. Harris's condition worsened. But Dr. Jackson worked calmly, methodically, doing everything in her power to bring him back from the brink of death. There was no time for apologies or explanations. There was only action. Dr. Jackson, though deeply hurt by his words, didn't let them show. This was her moment, not just to save a life, but to prove to herself and everyone else that she belonged. She had faced prejudice before, but this was different. Mr. Harris, an influential businessman and philanthropist, wasn't just rejecting her. He was rejecting the very idea of a black woman holding a position of authority in the medical field. "Let me speak to a real doctor," Mr. Harris demanded, his voice sharp, though it cracked with the pain from his condition. The staff exchanged uncomfortable glances, some nodding subtly in agreement with his request, while others shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to do. But Dr. Jackson knew she had to act quickly. This wasn't about getting approval from the staff. It was about saving his life. "Dr. Jackson, you need to step in," Dr. Miller urged, his voice firm but sympathetic. It was clear to everyone that she was the only one capable of handling Mr. Harris's critical condition. The hospital was filled with urgent cases, and time was running out for Mr. Harris. Dr. Jackson nodded, and without another word, she moved into action. As the team continued to prepare for the surgery, she felt the eyes of her colleagues on her. Some were supportive, while others, though silent, questioned her ability to handle the situation. But there was no room for doubt. There was no room for hesitation. Dr. Jackson's hands moved with precision, every action calculated to stabilize Mr. Harris's failing body. She knew his life was slipping away with every passing second, but she also knew that her skill, not her skin color, would determine whether he lived or died. As she continued to work, the room fell into an eerie silence, the tension thick as everyone watched Dr. Jackson's every move. Mr. Harris, still weak but now fighting against his own pride, could feel the shift. He realized, despite his objections, that he had no choice but to trust her. His life was in her hands, and she wasn't backing down. For Dr. Jackson, this wasn't just another medical procedure, it was a battle for respect. And in this moment, she wasn't just fighting to save a life. She was fighting for the respect that every doctor, regardless of race or gender, deserved. The team, although eager to save him, was caught in a difficult position. Some of the nurses were clearly uncomfortable, while others avoided Dr. Jackson's gaze altogether. No one dared to outright challenge Mr. Harris, but they knew that without Dr. Jackson's expertise, Mr. Harris would not survive. "I can't wait any longer. He's going into cardiac arrest," Dr. Jackson said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. She knew her every move had to be precise. There was no room for error, no time to argue. She was the only one qualified to save him. Dr. Miller stepped aside, his eyes filled with a mix of respect and helplessness. "You have to do this, Dr. Jackson. There's no one else," he said, giving her the final push she needed. In that moment, Dr. Jackson took charge, her heart pounding, her mind racing through the steps of the procedure. She couldn't afford to back down. Mr. Harris's life was slipping away, and only she had the ability to save him. With unwavering confidence, Dr. Jackson stepped forward, fully aware of the prejudice she faced. But as she began to stabilize Mr. Harris, all that mattered was her skill, her training, and her determination to save a life, no matter the circumstances. With no time to lose, Dr. Jackson steps in and begins to stabilize Mr. Harris, using her expertise in cardiology and surgical intervention, despite his vocal objections. The moment had come. Mr. Harris's body was on the brink of failure, and Dr. Jackson was the only one who could intervene. Dr. Jackson moved quickly, taking control of the situation. The rest of the team followed her lead, but it was clear that her confidence was what made the difference. As she worked, her hands steady, her mind sharp, Dr. Jackson knew that this was the moment she had been preparing for her entire career. Though Mr. Harris's objections continued, Dr. Jackson blocked out the noise. She had been dismissed before, but today, she wasn't going to let his prejudice dictate the outcome. Her skill was all that mattered now. "Keep him stable," Dr. Jackson ordered the team. Her voice was calm, precise, commanding respect even in the face of Mr. Harris's hostility. As she continued to work, her colleagues began to step in line. No one dared question her authority now. Minutes ticked by as Dr. Jackson made the necessary adjustments. Her heart raced, but her hands remained steady. Every movement was deliberate, focused solely on saving the man who had rejected her. But the urgency of the situation left no room for distractions. This was about saving him, not his prejudices. As the surgery progressed, Mr. Harris's condition began to stabilize. His blood pressure slowly returned to normal, and his heart began to beat stronger. Despite the hate and the resistance, Dr. Jackson's expertise was undeniable. Dr. Jackson saves Mr. Harris's life in a delicate procedure, shocking everyone in the room. She calmly and methodically proves her worth in the most crucial moment of the day. The emergency room was still filled with tension, but now it was mixed with something else, respect. Dr. Jackson's hands were steady, her movements precise, and her mind laser-focused on saving Mr. Harris. The procedure wasn't easy, but Dr. Jackson was in her element. She worked quickly, using her years of training and expertise to repair the damage Mr. Harris's heart had suffered. She navigated the delicate procedure with the skill of someone who had done it 1,000 times, even though this was her first day as an attending physician. The team worked in sync, following Dr. Jackson's commands. Despite Mr. Harris's continued objections and the quiet murmurs from some of her colleagues, Dr. Jackson pushed through. She wasn't there to prove herself to anyone else, she was there to save a life. And she did. As the final steps of the procedure were completed, Dr. Jackson wiped the sweat from her brow, her expression calm but satisfied. Mr. Harris's heart had been stabilized, and the worst of the crisis was over. The room fell silent. The team stood in awe, stunned not just by the complexity of the procedure, but by the way Dr. Jackson handled it with such precision and grace, despite the hostility she had faced moments before. Dr. Jackson didn't need to say a word. Her work had spoken for her. And in that moment, everyone in the room realized that her abilities were beyond question. As Mr. Harris is recovering, he begins to realize that his life was saved not by a white doctor, but by the very person he had dismissed, Dr. Jackson. As the hours passed, Mr. Harris slowly regained consciousness. His mind was foggy, the weight of what had happened beginning to set in. He felt weak, but his heart was still beating. His wife, Margaret, stood by his side, her face a mask of concern. But Mr. Harris, still groggy, focused on something else, something he hadn't expected. The black doctor who he had rejected had saved him. As he lay there, trying to piece together what had happened, he felt a strange mix of gratitude and humiliation. Dr. Jackson had never left his side, never showed anger or resentment, even when he had refused her care. Instead, she had quietly, expertly saved his life. Margaret noticed her husband's change in demeanor. "Are you okay, Paul?" she asked softly. I'm not sure," Mr. Harris whispered. His gaze turned toward the door. "Where is she?" Margaret frowned, not understanding. "Who?" "The doctor," Mr. Harris said slowly, his voice still weak. "The one who saved me." He didn't fully grasp it yet, but there was a deep sense of confusion. He couldn't deny that Dr. Jackson had done what no one else could, what he had refused to believe she could do. When Dr. Jackson entered the room later that day, Mr. Harris looked at her differently. No longer was there contempt in his eyes. Now, there was something closer to respect. Dr. Jackson noticed the change, though she didn't comment on it. Instead, she checked his vitals and made sure everything was stable. Her professional demeanor remained unchanged, but inside, she couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. This wasn't just about saving a patient's life. It was about breaking through the biases and prejudices that had stood in her way. The tension in the hospital grows as staff members realize that Dr. Jackson, an underrepresented black woman, has done what no one else could, but many still struggle with their own biases. The news that Mr. Harris had survived, and that Dr. Jackson was the one who saved him, spread quickly through the hospital. Some of the staff were in awe of her skills, while others remained silent, unable to reconcile their deeply held biases with the reality they had just witnessed. Dr. Jackson had been the one to save the day, and there was no denying it. But there was a palpable shift in the air. For Dr. Jackson, it was a bittersweet victory. She had saved Mr. Harris, but the hospital's reaction made it clear that her work wasn't universally accepted. Her colleagues, while not openly hostile, continued to give her sideways glances, hesitant to fully embrace her abilities. As Dr. Jackson walked down the hall, some nurses nodded in passing, but there was no warmth in the greetings. A few older doctors avoided eye contact, still unsure of how to treat her. In the break room, whispers could be heard. "Did you hear about Dr. Jackson?" one nurse asked another. "She really pulled it off, didn't she?" But there was no enthusiasm in their voices, just surprise. Dr. Jackson was used to this kind of treatment. Her entire career had been about proving herself, battling the subtle prejudices that people often didn't even realize they had. She had dealt with it before, but now, in the aftermath of saving one of the most influential figures in the hospital's network, it felt different. This was supposed to be her moment of acceptance, of validation. But instead, it felt like a quiet victory, one that still wasn't fully recognized. Mr. Harris, still weak but conscious, calls for Dr. Jackson. He has an urgent need to speak to her. Something shifts within him. The day after the procedure, Mr. Harris woke up in a quiet hospital room, his body weak but slowly recovering. His breathing was shallow, and his thoughts were clouded, but one thing was clear in his mind: he needed to speak with Dr. Jackson. It wasn't just about his recovery. It was about the overwhelming realization that the woman he had so vehemently rejected had saved his life. He was in no condition to move, but he was determined. "I need Dr. Jackson," he told the nurse who entered his room, his voice low and hoarse. "Please bring her to me." The nurse looked at him with an expression of surprise. It was clear that Mr. Harris hadn't just been rejecting Dr. Jackson's treatment. He had been adamant in his dislike for her. But now, his tone had changed. The realization of his situation, of how close he had come to death, had begun to settle in, and with it, the need to express his thoughts to the very person he had previously dismissed. After a few minutes, Dr. Jackson entered the room, her face professional but with a hint of curiosity. She had saved Mr. Harris's life, and now she would face the man who had once refused her care. "Mr. Harris," she said, her voice calm, "how are you feeling?" "I'm alive," he muttered, his voice filled with disbelief. "But I'm not just here to talk about that. I owe you something, Dr. Jackson. Something I didn't think I'd ever say." Dr. Jackson stood still, waiting for him to continue. She knew he was weak, and the emotions were raw. She could sense the shift in him, something she had never expected after all the insults and prejudice he had thrown her way. Mr. Harris, humbled and overwhelmed by the experience, apologizes to Dr. Jackson, admitting that he never imagined someone like her could save him. "I was wrong," Mr. Harris said softly, his voice full of regret. His eyes, once filled with contempt, now held nothing but remorse. "I never imagined someone like you could save my life. I refused to let you treat me. I didn't believe in you, didn't believe in people like you. But now I see I was a fool." Dr. Jackson listened carefully, her expression composed but her heart racing. The apology she had never expected was coming from the last person she thought would offer it. "I've spent my life believing that people like you couldn't possibly be qualified, couldn't possibly have the skills that someone like me would expect," Mr. Harris continued, his voice filled with the weight of his earlier prejudices. "I thought that the color of your skin had something to do with your ability. But I've learned that it's about the person, about the heart, the mind, and the skills. Not what's on the outside." The room was quiet, save for the sound of his raspy voice, filled with regret. Dr. Jackson, though surprised, remained composed. This wasn't just about him apologizing, this was about the deeper change he had gone through. "Mr. Harris," she said softly, "I appreciate your apology, but it's not something you need to say. What matters is that you're alive, and that I could do my job, just like any doctor should." Dr. Jackson, surprised but composed, listens as Mr. Harris explains how his views have changed. The power dynamics between them are completely altered. For Dr. Jackson, the apology was unexpected, but even more shocking was the transformation in Mr. Harris. The man who had once treated her as less than capable was now acknowledging his own flaws. "I never thought I'd meet someone like you," Mr. Harris said, his voice cracking. "I've spent my life thinking people like you weren't good enough for a place like this. And I've been wrong. I've been so wrong." Dr. Jackson stood at the side of his bed, listening. The power dynamics in the room had shifted completely. No longer was she the one fighting for respect. Now, Mr. Harris was the one fighting for redemption, for a chance to make amends for his past actions. "I've been given a second chance at life," Mr. Harris continued, his voice filled with emotion. "And I realize now that people like you, the ones I've ignored, the ones I've dismissed, are the ones who can save us when we need it most." The moment was profound, and for Dr. Jackson, it was more than just a win for herself. It was a win for everyone who had ever been overlooked, for everyone who had been underestimated. It was proof that change, while slow, was possible, even in the most unlikely of situations. Word begins to spread throughout the hospital that Dr. Jackson, against all odds, has saved one of the most influential figures in the community. The ripple effect of Mr. Harris's recovery spread quickly through Riverside General Hospital. It started with hushed whispers in the hallways, with doctors and nurses exchanging looks of disbelief. Dr. Jackson, the woman who had been overlooked, the one who had been treated as less than, had saved a man who was known and respected in the community. By the time the afternoon shift began, Dr. Jackson had become the subject of conversation everywhere she went. The staff, who had once been silently skeptical, now regarded her with a new sense of respect. Her skills had spoken louder than any prejudice ever could. In the break room, Dr. Miller, who had supported her throughout the ordeal, gave her a quiet nod. "You did it," he said simply. "Not just for Mr. Harris, but for everyone who doubted you." Other staff members came forward to commend her, offering smiles and congratulations. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. Dr. Jackson had earned her place, not just by saving Mr. Harris's life, but by showing everyone that race had nothing to do with the work she did. And as the day wore on, Dr. Jackson knew that this was only the beginning. Her name was no longer just a name, she was Dr. Jackson, and she had earned the right to be seen and respected. Some of the hospital staff, who had secretly shared Mr. Harris's prejudices, began to rethink their own attitudes towards Dr. Jackson. As word continued to spread about Dr. Jackson's life-saving work, something began to shift within the hospital. Dr. Jackson wasn't just the doctor who saved Mr. Harris. She had become a symbol of something much larger. A symbol of defiance against prejudice, against the deep-seated biases that often existed within the walls of Riverside General Hospital. It was subtle at first. In the hallways, whispers about Dr. Jackson's skills started to outnumber the hushed criticisms. One by one, the staff members who had quietly sided with Mr. Harris's prejudices began to change their tune. They began to question their assumptions, to look past the color of her skin and instead focus on her abilities. Dr. Miller, always a supporter, noticed a shift in the attitudes of some of his colleagues. Nurses who had once avoided Dr. Jackson now approached her with a nod of respect. Doctors who had kept their distance now made an effort to collaborate with her. But it wasn't just the staff's attitudes that were changing. The culture within the hospital was slowly beginning to evolve. Where once there had been an underlying current of racism and bias, there was now a growing realization that Dr. Jackson's presence in the hospital was not just important, it was essential. For Dr. Jackson, the change wasn't immediate or perfect, but it was a start. She had been underestimated for too long, but now, her abilities were finally being recognized. The battle wasn't over, but it felt like a victory, one she'd fought for every single day. Dr. Jackson faces a difficult conversation with her colleagues who question whether she truly deserves the recognition, still harboring doubts about her ability. Despite the growing support Dr. Jackson received from some staff, there was still tension in the air. Some colleagues were uncomfortable with the way things had unfolded, and they didn't hide their discomfort. One afternoon, Dr. Jackson found herself cornered in the hospital break room by two senior doctors, Dr. Parsons and Dr. Clark. Both had worked at Riverside General for years, and both had made their reservations about Dr. Jackson's abilities clear in the past. "Dr. Jackson," Dr. Parsons began, his voice smooth but cautious, "we don't doubt your skill, but we just want to make sure this whole thing with Mr. Harris hasn't been blown out of proportion." Dr. Jackson stood there, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She knew this was coming, the lingering doubt, the underlying questioning of her ability despite her obvious success. "I mean, yes, you saved Mr. Harris, but," Dr. Clark added, "that doesn't necessarily mean you're ready for this. What if your skills aren't as sharp as they seem?" The words hit her like a slap in the face, but Dr. Jackson didn't let her emotions get the best of her. She had faced more than her fair share of doubts throughout her career, but this was different. She wasn't going to let them undermine everything she had worked for. "I've worked hard to get where I am," Dr. Jackson said, her voice calm but firm. "I've earned my position, and I've earned the respect of my peers. If I can save Mr. Harris's life, I can handle whatever comes next." There was a pause, and for a moment, the room felt charged with the weight of the conversation. Dr. Jackson had no intention of backing down. She had spent years earning her place at Riverside, and no one was going to take that from her now. "Maybe it's time we start recognizing people for their abilities," Dr. Jackson added, her gaze steady. "Not their skin color, not their gender, just their skills." The room fell silent for a long moment. Neither Dr. Parsons nor Dr. Clark said anything in response. But the words had been said, and the seed of change had been planted. Dr. Jackson's mentor, Dr. Lewis, steps in to support her, publicly commending her skills and reminding the staff of her years of medical training and experience. The following day, after her difficult conversation with Dr. Parsons and Dr. Clark, Dr. Jackson received an unexpected visit in her office. It was Dr. Lewis, her mentor and one of the few people who had truly supported her throughout her medical career. Dr. Lewis had been a constant presence in Dr. Jackson's life since she was a medical student. He had always recognized her potential and had been the one person who didn't let her race or gender get in the way of her success. "Dr. Jackson," he began, smiling warmly as he entered her office, "I heard about what happened with Mr. Harris. And I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. You've proven that you belong here, in a way that no one can deny anymore." Dr. Jackson felt a surge of emotion as Dr. Lewis spoke. He had been her mentor for years, and his support had meant more to her than anyone could know. "Thank you, Dr. Lewis," Dr. Jackson said, her voice thick with gratitude. "I've been struggling to prove myself to others. It's hard when you're constantly questioned." Dr. Lewis nodded, his expression turning serious. "I understand. But you need to remember this, your skills speak for themselves. The rest of them will catch up, eventually. In the meantime, don't let their doubts make you doubt yourself. You've earned your place here." Dr. Jackson smiled, feeling a renewed sense of confidence. Dr. Lewis's words were exactly what she needed to hear. Later that day, during the hospital staff meeting, Dr. Lewis stood before the group. The room grew silent as he addressed them. "I'd like to take a moment to publicly commend Dr. Jackson," Dr. Lewis said, his voice clear and commanding. "She's a doctor of great skill and expertise, and she's proven herself beyond a shadow of a doubt. It's time we start recognizing the value of every person on this team, regardless of their background." The room was quiet for a moment, but as Dr. Lewis continued speaking, Dr. Jackson could feel the shift. This was the kind of support she needed. It was a public statement that would make it harder for her colleagues to dismiss her abilities. Despite the apology from Mr. Harris, Dr. Jackson faces more subtle forms of resistance, as others in the hospital continue to treat her as less than based on the color of her skin. As the days passed and Dr. Jackson began to receive more recognition for her skills, the undercurrents of prejudice didn't disappear. Though Mr. Harris had apologized and some of her colleagues had started to come around, there were still many in the hospital who couldn't fully let go of their biases. One afternoon, Dr. Jackson walked into the ICU to check on one of her patients. As she entered the room, she noticed a nurse, Brenda, who had been working at Riverside General for years, giving her a stiff, polite smile. Brenda was known for her professionalism, but something about the way she treated Dr. Jackson always felt off. "How's Mr. Ramirez doing?" Dr. Jackson asked, her voice warm but professional. "He's stable," Brenda replied, her tone more clipped than usual. "But I've already noted everything in the chart. You don't need to worry about it." Dr. Jackson paused, sensing the tension in Brenda's voice. Brenda's treatment of her wasn't overtly hostile, but it was clear that she wasn't fully on board with Dr. Jackson being in charge. Dr. Jackson could feel the weight of the situation. This wasn't the first time she had encountered this sort of subtle prejudice. There were colleagues who didn't outright challenge her, but their actions spoke volumes. They treated her as if she were a lesser doctor, even if they never said it out loud. Dr. Jackson gave Brenda a polite nod and moved on, but her frustration lingered. She knew she couldn't let these microaggressions derail her. She had worked too hard to let anyone make her feel inferior. Later that afternoon, she found herself in the conference room with a group of senior doctors. Dr. Jackson presented her findings on a particularly complicated case, but she couldn't ignore the dismissive glances exchanged between Dr. Clark and Dr. Parsons. The way they spoke over her suggestions, or how their voices became curt when she spoke, it was clear they weren't giving her the same level of respect they afforded to their white colleagues. As the meeting came to a close, Dr. Jackson left the room feeling disheartened but determined. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more resistance, more subtle attempts to undermine her. But Dr. Jackson wasn't ready to back down. She had already proven herself once, and she would do it again. This wasn't just about one patient, it was about changing the way people saw her and the people who looked like her in the medical field. News outlets pick up the story of Dr. Jackson's life-saving work, turning her into a symbol of both medical excellence and racial justice in the healthcare industry. Dr. Jackson hadn't expected the attention. Her only goal had been to do her job, to save lives and prove her worth in a world that had too often tried to define her by the color of her skin. But what happened next changed everything. Word about her heroic work with Mr. Harris spread quickly beyond Riverside General Hospital's walls. It wasn't just the fact that she had saved the life of one of the wealthiest and most influential figures in the city, it was the way she had done it in the face of blatant racial prejudice. Soon, local news outlets were picking up the story, running headlines that described Dr. Jackson not only as a brilliant doctor, but as a symbol of resilience and excellence in a field marred by systemic racism. The story made its way to national news outlets, and before long, Dr. Jackson's name was being discussed on talk shows, in online forums, and in boardrooms. The media attention, though overwhelming, came with a wave of support. Dr. Jackson received messages from across the country. Letters from young girls who dreamed of becoming doctors, from black professionals who had faced similar prejudices, and from people who simply wanted to commend her for doing the work they knew so many others were too afraid to do. But along with the praise came scrutiny. The hospital was forced to address the issue of race within its walls. Conversations that had long been ignored were now front and center. The leadership team, once hesitant, began to recognize that Dr. Jackson's case was part of a much larger issue in healthcare, the need to dismantle systemic racism and ensure that all doctors, regardless of race, received equal respect and opportunities. For Dr. Jackson, the overwhelming exposure was both a triumph and a burden. She had proven herself in the most dramatic way possible, but the weight of that recognition came with a new responsibility, to ensure that her victory wasn't a singular moment, but a movement. The hospital administration is forced to confront the issue of systemic racism within its ranks as Dr. Jackson's case becomes a flashpoint for broader conversations about equality in healthcare. The impact of Dr. Jackson's story rippled throughout Riverside General Hospital and beyond. The hospital was forced into a public reckoning. For too long, racial biases had been allowed to flourish in the background. Small slights, quiet dismissals, microaggressions that had gone unchecked. But with the spotlight on Dr. Jackson, the time for change had come. The administration called for a series of meetings to address the issue of racial inequality within the hospital. Dr. Jackson, once a marginalized voice, was now at the forefront of the discussion. She had become the face of a much-needed conversation that too many had been unwilling to have for years. In a series of tense meetings, Dr. Jackson's story was shared as a catalyst for the changes that were about to take place. A major overhaul of the hospital's hiring practices, patient care policies, and staff education programs was proposed. They would now be required to undergo training to recognize and combat their own biases. The goal was to ensure that no doctor, regardless of their race, would ever face the same struggles Dr. Jackson had. Dr. Jackson's mentor, Dr. Lewis, stood by her side throughout the process, helping the hospital's leadership understand how important it was not just to acknowledge their mistakes, but to take meaningful action. "This isn't just about apologizing for the past," Dr. Lewis said during one meeting. "It's about ensuring this never happens again. It's about creating a space where all people are seen for their skills and their abilities, not the color of their skin." The board agreed, and Dr. Jackson was given the task of helping design the new programs and workshops that would reshape the hospital's culture. For Dr. Jackson, the work was only beginning. She had saved one life, but now she had the opportunity to change many more, for herself, for her colleagues, and for future generations of doctors who would come after her. If you enjoyed our story, please subscribe to our channel for more stories and don't forget to like and share.